Episode 131, The Birds and the Bees. Welcome back to One Extraordinary Marriage, where we talk about life, love, and the pursuit of intimacy. You're here with Alisa DiLorenzo.
And Tony DiLorenzo.
And I just have to say, in all honesty, this is my most favorite hour of the week.
Yes. Other than those times when we have sex.
Yeah, but I'm just talking like the 1 hour that I know is going to happen in almost the exact same time every week.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, like when we have sex, like it could be, 15 minutes. It could be an hour. I mean, it's kind of all varied, but this hour.
Yes.
Ish, 45 minutes, hour-ish. Yeah. It's like, okay, boom, I'm getting my connection on.
That's it. We are.
And just welcome to all of you. We know we've got a lot of new listeners. We're happy that you're with us. Those of you that have been with us a long time, we're thrilled that you're still with us, because we know that, you're adding to this community and you're spreading the word. And we thank you for that. From time to time, we just feel the need to let you know how much you're appreciated.
Yep. You got it.
We just actually spoke, we had posted about a month and a half ago when we were on Parent Savers.
Yes.
Another new podcast. Thank you. I'm like, I want to say blog, and I'm like, it's not a blog, Parent Savers. And we were actually talking to Casey, the one who interviewed us today. We actually
the show host.
Wow. We're recording this a little bit later than we usually do. And apparently my brain has stopped working. But we were talking to Casey, who was the show host today. And she was just sharing some good news with us that we are in the top 5 of their most downloaded podcasts. And so that was just great to hear. And I'm sure a lot of you are coming to us from Parent Savers. So if you are, welcome. And those of you that have stumbled across us on iTunes, or, your friends posted something that we put up on Facebook and you're like, okay, I got to go check out what these people are doing. You're in for a wild adventure, because no 2 weeks with the DiLorenzos are ever the same. And you just never know what you're going to get when you tune into us. So welcome. And today's episode, The Birds and the Bees. We have had so many conversations over the last couple of weeks talking with couples about what information we did or did not receive from our parents growing up. And for those of us that were raised in church, also kind of the influence that brought to, how we view sex and marriage.
And what information we got.
Or didn't get.
Yes.
And it's just somebody was asking me the other day, like, how do you come up with your topics for your shows? I said, well, usually it's a result of a conversation that one or both of us have had with somebody, or repeated conversations that all seem to happen around the same theme. Mm-hmm. And that's very much where this episode is coming from, in that, Tony and I are in our late 30s. Most of our friends are kind of in this late 20s to 40-ish, 50, early 50s, couple of kids. We're all kind of doing life at about the same place. Mm-hmm. We know those of you listening are everywhere from young 20-something singles to those of you that are, I'm not going to say you're old, you're just in your 60s and 70s. We know You're all out there. We've got a wide spectrum. But we know the information that we received and did not receive growing up on sex. I love it the way you tell your story. So you tell your story first.
My story of my dad. First and foremost, I want to just say, hey, if you want to get in touch with us, you can email us at info@oneextraordinarymarriage.com. That goes to our email box, and Alisa and I both are able to see that, because we know many of you want to reach out. So please do. info@oneextraordinarymarriage.com. You can also call us at any time. Do not worry about if you're on the other side of the world. We're here in San Diego, California. It goes straight to a Google voicemail account, so you're not going to wake us up. So don't worry about it. Pick up your phone. You can call 858-876-5663. And for those of you who are on Facebook a lot, you can always go to facebook.com/oneextraordinarymarriage. And right there on the right-hand corner, it says message. You can hit the little message, and you can message us there. So you can get to us in many different ways. So, how did I learn about the birds and the bees? There's a couple of ways that I learned about the birds and the bees, and the story that Alisa is talking about is the one my father repeated to me numerous times as a teenager. And I don't remember when it started. I want to say it was probably freshman year in high school, somewhere in that time frame. Definitely remember it as I was getting ready to graduate from high school and go on to college. My dad would tell me, Tone, don't get a girl pregnant.
Okay, but you got to picture this Italian accent. I mean, it's just.
And my dad's about 4 or 5 inches shorter than me, smaller than me.
It's a visual. I know you guys can't see it over the radio, but it's just.
One of these days I'll get a picture with my dad. I love the man. But that's how my parents talked to me about the birds and the bees. The other way I got it, for those of you who haven't listened back to episode 7, that was my episode, and Alisa and I talked about my addiction to pornography. That is where I learned about sex. At an age of 12, that's when I first saw my first Playboy or Hustler or one of those. And from there, it went to XXX movies, more magazines. That's where I learned sex.
And I don't remember ever having a conversation with my parents about.
None?
I don't remember it at all. I do remember. So I was raised in Catholic schools. I started attending Catholic schools when I was in 2nd grade and went all the way through high school. And I do remember. It had to have been. I think it was 5th or 6th grade. There was a health class,
okay.
And it was very much the birds and the bees. This is how you make a baby type of thing. But here was always the kind of thing that we would joke about in our. And I went to a small Catholic school. There was one class for every grade. And some of our classes were taught by sisters, by nuns. And I remember that Sister Linda was my teacher at the time, that we had this, it wasn't even a video. I mean, we had I'm old enough that we had the old reels, the things that, you got to like feed it through and all this kind of stuff. But I remember that coming in, and I remember watching this movie. And then it's the whole, let's separate the girl,
Yeah, you know what? That's right. That would be my third way, was in school. And your parents had to sign off on it. My parents did anyways. I remember, because this was probably like 8th grade, my parents had to sign off on that to allow me to watch the video. Yeah. Yeah,
I don't remember the parents having to sign off, but I do remember, the girls are separated and the boys are separated, and the girls have Sister Linda talking to us about sex. Okay, see, Tony just made the face of, how do you have
a sister
teaching you about sex? And then, it was people talking in high school, because, people got pregnant in high school, and, everybody kind of knew who was doing what with whom. And then I went to college, and I did all kinds of discovering on my own. So, it's funny because we've had these conversations with so many people kind of in our age group, and we're hearing the same things over and over and over again. My parents didn't talk to me about sex, or, once they found out I was having sex, then, literally, the junk hit the fan and all hell broke loose. Those types of reactions.
Right. And more importantly, we're giving you this to make you think back of, okay, how did you learn about it? Mm-hmm. And here's the pivot point. Here's the shift. Is that how do you bring what you learned as a teenager or even younger, and how do you bring that into your marriage, right? Because that's the big thing. That's where the conversations that we've been having go to, because it's my parents, and I don't know who this is from or what, but my parents, when they told me about it, it was dirty. It was nasty. My genitalia, it's bad. It's ugly. And these images and these thoughts from a very young, tender age have probably affected you into your marriage.
Well, we know they do because we hear from so many of you. They're like, how do I overcome this? And I remember when we were in Michigan, speaking at this marriage retreat, I did have a older gentleman, definitely I got the impression that he was a parent, asking me the question, well, when do we stop? How do we teach our kids, or when do we teach our kids that sex is not bad? And I answered him saying, we shouldn't be teaching our kids that sex is bad in the first place. You might not want your children to have sex outside of marriage, and that's the lesson really that you want to give them, that sex is a gift from God. It is, it's placed within the covenant of marriage for a reason. Because when we start giving ourselves out here and there and to this partner and to that partner, you lose a little bit of yourself.
Yep.
Whether you want to believe it or not, when you start having multiple partners and you've made that choice to be intimate, physically intimate with somebody, and then it doesn't work out, well, guess what? A part of you goes with that person. And that's hard. So what I explained to this gentleman was, I want my children to know that I want them to have sex within the covenant of marriage. Sex in and of itself is not a bad thing. And the sooner we start teaching our kids and working on changing our own mindset that sex is not bad,
right,
the healthier we're going to be in our relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Because the reality is that we've got a generation of which we're a part of who has been taught that either we don't talk about it, or if we do talk about it, it's not a good thing because, you can get pregnant or you can get diseases or, just stay away. Just, it's bad. And then they're married and they're supposed to flip this light switch and suddenly, have at it, be happy about it, and go at it like gangbusters. It's supposed to be this great thing because you're married now, but you've got all this mental baggage that comes in, and we hear from so many of you that are dealing with this on such a deep and painful level that we know we've got to address the issue of, okay, what are the messages that we've been given, and what do we start doing to change those messages? When I was raised Catholic, we weren't supposed to have sex. Sex was bad. I might not have heard it from my parents, but I definitely heard it from the church. I definitely heard it in school.
Right. And we're not saying that, hey, go off and tell your kids to go have sex before marriage. Don't misconstrue the message here. We're not saying that. What we're saying, though, is for those of you who do have kids, think about where you have come from and what learning you were given. And do you want your children to be in that same spot? So just think about that. But more importantly, we need to talk to you about you and what you learned, so that you can flip the switch and you can have the extraordinary sex that you desire in your marriage.
Right.
Because that's the big thing, right? We want that sexual intimacy with our spouse. We want it to be passionate. We want it to be romantic. We want it to be just this bonding experience, but we have so much of this baggage on us that we can't get away from it. Mm-hmm. And that's the tough part. And it's not one that's going to just go away with a snap of a finger. Just isn't. We wish it could. I mean, truly, I wish it could. Don't get me wrong, man. I lived in fear of having sex for a long time because of what my dad told me. I mean, lived in fear. I didn't understand it until I finally, read some books and talked to buddies and learned about it. And, oh, okay. But still, even then, that got brought into my relationship and my marriage with Alisa. Because, and don't forget, that pornography addiction that I had for many years, that also was being brought into my marriage and what I viewed a healthy sexual relationship to be. Mm-hmm. It's not healthy what happens in XXX movies. But again, that in my mind had me at a point where I couldn't shift for many years. For many, many years. It's been 8 years since I've gone off and away from pornography, and by far the sex is better than it's ever been, and it gets better because of that. So what can you do to start making that shift?
Well, and part of it starts with acknowledging and having those conversations with your spouse about how what was the message as you were being raised? How was sex viewed in your family? How, did you see some people have written us saying they've never seen their parents, go so far as to hold hands or even kiss.
Mm-hmm.
And, so then all of a sudden they're trying to, to be in this relationship, this marriage where, one spouse wants to be very affectionate and that's not the model. And so it's acknowledging, hey, you know what? I didn't see that. I want to have it, but I didn't see it. So we're going to have to do baby steps.
Right.
And for a lot of you, overcoming the messages that you received as a child, as a teenager, from school, from home, you're going to have to take baby steps. But so much, guys, of what we talk about goes back to having that communication with your spouse to say, this is where I'm coming from. This is who I am. This is, this is the stuff I'm bringing into this relationship.
Mm-hmm.
My parents, they told me sex was bad. And so I kind of feel like it's kind of this like weird thing. Or they told me that, my genitalia, that's just dirty. It's gross. It's whatever. And so I'm having a hard time, wanting to look at you or wanting to touch you or, and so you start with, it's kind of like we've talked about, when you talk about like how far you're going to go sexually and we say you only go as far as the most conservative spouse.
Right.
The same thing kind of applies when you're talking about moving past some of these barriers. It's going to be baby steps. And you just go as far as that one partner is able to go.
Right.
The thing that I would tell the partner that is struggling is that you have to keep moving forward. You can't allow yourself to be crippled by that baggage. You have your own story to write, so don't let somebody else's story keep replaying and cripple your marriage. Your parents, your educators, your buddies, your whomever may not have had the accurate information about what sex is, how it feels, what your body looks like. People like to put their own spin on things. It's what we do. And some people do that for power, for control. They want to manipulate the situation. The fact of the matter is that, sex can be an amazingly beautiful gift between a married couple. It can. And it can be one of those things where, there's a reason that artists have painted and sculpted and done everything with the human body for, centuries. It's because the human body is a pretty amazing thing. Mm-hmm. And it's beautiful, and people have revered it in its, as a naked art form for forever. So just, a couple people thinking that it looks ugly or it's bad, don't buy into that. Start by, being, explore yourself. Like, stand in front of a mirror and acknowledge who you are. See your spouse naked and say, oh my gosh, revel in who they are. The attractiveness that we have in our, that we see in our spouses, that's more than just what's above the neck. Mm-hmm. I was doing, just as an aside, I was doing a jewelry party a couple weeks ago, and my hostess was telling me, she's like, yeah, one of the first things I ever noticed about my husband was his calf muscles. And I was like, okay, because I'm thinking Tony's got great calf muscles too. And I totally get the whole calf muscle thing. And it was so funny because her husband came in to, I don't know, he was taking their daughter out. And so he came in to give her a kiss, and he turns around and I'm like, And I kind of tilt my head, and I'm watching him walk out the room, and I look at her and I'm like, you know what? He does have great calf muscles. And she just gave me this huge grin. But you know what? That's below the neck. And it wasn't like I was checking him out. I was just like, you know what? What is she? I want to see what she sees in him. I love hearing spouses brag on each other. Mm-hmm. I love the way his hands are, or, the way her arm, if she's got really defined arms or whatever it is, the way her hair, or just the way she smiles, or, there are so many things we appreciate about our spouses. And it's okay. And we encourage you to appreciate them naked. Crazy concept for some of you guys that are just like, I can't handle being naked in front of my spouse. I like turn off the lights, I hop into bed, I strip off my clothes. Maybe we get close enough to have sex and then I throw my clothes back on and it's over. Celebrate each other, you guys.
Yeah.
God gave you this spouse. This person's a gift. Start thinking of them as a gift. That means all of them. That means, whether... Okay. Tony does not have good looking feet. And this is something that was brought to my attention the very first summer we started dating. Because, do you remember Reva?
Yes.
Yes. So, it's just, it is what it is. I mean, my feet are not gorgeous either, but Reva, this girl that was in the internship program with me, Tony was walking around wearing probably his Tevas one day, and she comes up to me and she's like, yeah, that boy does not have good looking feet and he should not be wearing anything that shows his toes. And, I really didn't think anything of it, because I was just like, okay, but there's so much other great stuff those are his toes, whether they're covered or uncovered, big deal. Do I love his feet are his feet. That's part of who he is. I celebrate it. His feet have walked from Mexico to Canada and biked hundreds of miles, and his feet have done amazing things. Your spouse, their body has done amazing things. Look at them. Look at yourself. What have you done? Maybe you're a woman that has birthed children. Okay, that's a pretty amazing feat to be able to carry a baby. And maybe you don't look the way you did before you had babies, but you know what? You carried a life. Celebrate that. Don't beat yourself up because you didn't look like you did on your wedding day. It's okay. You know what? He loves you. He loves you for who you are and what you have brought to the marriage. Maybe you're not as fit as you used to be. That's a choice. You guys have heard us talk enough about fitness and nutrition on the show to know that if you're getting a little bit softer than you want to be, you can check out, everything that we've got going on at Fit Marriage. But you can make a choice if you want to be toner. If not, and you're feeling uncomfortable because of that, talk to your spouse. Maybe it doesn't even bug them. Maybe it's all in your head. Because guess what? We play out a lot of crazy junk in our head. We do. We play all kinds of, broken records that just play the same message over and over again. And basically the message boils down to, I'm not worthy.
Right. And a lot of those messages were brought to us, when we were teenagers by our parents, possibly by folks in the church, when when we are at that age, when we're trying to learn about our sexuality, and we never got a grip on it. We weren't told truthfully and honestly about it. And because of that, we bring that baggage into the marriage. And like Alisa said earlier, it's really important that the two of you do talk about this and how you were taught about sex. How did you learn about it? Because I think it'll give you a lot of good insights on your spouse right now, where they're at. And you can start looking and going, okay, now I'm understanding why you have the propensity to, pull away when I get close to you. Maybe you were called a whore or a slut. That can carry a lot of baggage, especially if it came from somebody you really trusted. For a guy, man, you could have been called, I don't know, what do they used to call guys? I can't even think of.
I think the thing with guys is that it was always sort of, a notch on their belt. I mean, it was, I don't know.
No, I mean, I remember guys that were just, I remember in college anyways, I remember guys that were just too much. And I don't know what we called them or anything, but it was just like, dude, what are you doing? I mean, I used to look at some of those guys and just go, stop, man. I mean, I don't see it as being a notch on your belt. I never did. Not for me anyways. But I think guys can get labeled as well and carry those same feelings, the same baggage, the same records that are playing in their mind over and over again into their marriage. And And so the conversation is really key when you're talking about the birds and the bees with each other. Mm-hmm. I mean, let's get back down to the basic here is that we both came from different backgrounds. We both came from different parents who raised us differently, who taught us about sex or didn't teach us about sex differently. And so what we end up doing is we end up coming into our marriage with these thoughts of what our marriage is going to be and how it's going to be different or how it's going to be better or whatever it might be than our parents. And we bring in this idea of what our sexual intimacy is going to be. The problem is neither Alisa nor I or you or your spouse has ESP. So you cannot read your spouse's mind and know what they envision to be this amazing sexual intimacy, right? And so what ends up happening is you have roadblocks. You know, it's your spouse, your husband making that advance. But you, in your mind, were called names that honestly turn you off. He does not know that. He does not know that. You know, so you got to explain that to him or her. I mean, we haven't even touched on one of the big things, sexually molested. I mean, if you were molested as a child, at some point in age, raped. I mean, these incidences have a huge impact on how you act and react to your spouse. Mm-hmm. They do. And you cannot and you should not be shoving these things down, stuffing them away to never to be seen or heard of. I really do believe that when you are doing that, the devil is winning. You are pushing it so far away that God cannot get to you. And you got to get it out. You need to let your spouse know. You need to let a counselor or a therapist know. You need to have somebody there that you can confide in and let them know what's happening. And I truly believe if you are married and you're going through these issues, you're dealing with it with somebody who's in there in between you and your spouse so that you guys can work through these issues. They're huge. So I just want to bring that up because a lot of people don't want to talk about it. They don't. You know, a lot of people on air, they don't even want to talk about these issues. You know, but it happens. I mean, I was reading a story of some businesswoman that I came across, and I mean, she says right there in her book, I mean, she was gang raped. And my gosh, I was just like, oh my gosh, I'm reading this business book, and here she is. She's talking about that and how it so impacted her life, you know? And until she was able to just give that up to God and work through that, was she then able to give herself wholly and fully to her husband. And now, having been able to do that, how she is free from it and how she and her spouse have such an amazing marriage.
And that's the crux of it. That all of this stuff that we bring into our marriage can keep us from experiencing true intimacy with our spouse. Mm-hmm. And if we don't make the effort to work through them, if we don't decide that, you know what, I said I do to this person in all circumstances. So that means that all of me, I need to share that with them. So, you know, all that baggage, you got to unpack it for your spouse. And, you know, if you're the one on the receiving end of all this information, you've got to love your spouse in this moment. If they are choosing to be vulnerable to you, you've got to honor that vulnerability. Because like we've told you guys before, and we'll tell you many, many more times in the future, your marriage should be the safest place for you. The safest place for you to share those dark times, to share what has gone on, to share the pain. Because when you find someone that you can fully be yourself with, that you can unpack your baggage and say, you know what, this is what has happened to me. This is why I feel this way. This is what somebody told me. This is what somebody did to me. And it's ugly. And I really don't want to share it with you. But if we're going to have a future, I have to share it with you. And when you are loved in that moment, then you're going to start to see a marriage, a relationship like you have never seen before. Because it's what we've shared about taking off the masks.
Yeah.
And it allows you to get past what's in your past. You're not going to forget it, but it's going to have diminished importance. Because you are now putting yourself in a relationship that is healthy, that is building you up instead of tearing you down. And when you find that, that's when the fireworks start to happen. When you can have the conversations with your spouse about, yeah, well, you know what, you heard Tony, don't get her pregnant. Okay. I mean, probably the first time he heard that, he's like, I don't even know what I'm doing to get her pregnant, but okay, don't get her pregnant. Got it.
Yep.
And me being taught by a nun who, has never had sex. And it's like, okay, my brain can't really figure that out. Like, why don't we have married people teaching us in Catholic school about sex? And then all of a sudden I'm, in college and I'm trying, it's like trying to figure that all out. And, and all of a sudden I find myself, a few years later, I find myself married. I'm like, I still don't even know what I'm doing. But we put ourselves in a position, it took us a while. It took us many years to unpack our baggage. Mm-hmm. But we did. And so for those of you that are wondering, you know what, can I unpack this? Can I share with my spouse? I hope that you find some hope in the fact that in spite of the early years of our marriage, we're talking like the first 10 years, folks.
Yeah.
11 that we were working on this stuff. Well, most of those years we weren't working on it, and it was year 11 that we started to. Okay, look at that as a hope situation. We didn't give up at we didn't end with the 7-year itch. We didn't end with the 10-year, I don't know, people have started talking about 10-year as another one where, an itch is starting to happen and people are starting to look elsewhere. We didn't. Because ultimately we'd made a decision that this was our marriage. That this was it. So we were going to have to figure that out. And that's what I encourage you guys to do, to figure out how to start having those conversations, to sit down with your spouse and say, we just need to talk about it. I know that this has kind of become a sticky point in our marriage. For those of you that are thinking about getting married, maybe you're engaged and you haven't had these conversations with your spouse or spouse to be, it's never too early. If you're engaged, it's not too early to start having these conversations.
And I want to read something real quick. So on, let me see, One Extraordinary Marriage on Facebook, I posted up something, August 13th I did. And it says, all communication problems are due to the reason that we do not listen to understand. We listen only to reply. So did you hear that? We do not listen to understand. We listen only to reply. And it's during these big talks. I mean, these are state of your marriage conversations. When we're talking about how we learned about the birds and the bees and how names or labels were put upon us that are hindering us from having the sexual intimacy we desire. These are times when you need to listen to understand, not to reply. These are times when you just need to listen to your spouse. Hold their hand. Let them know they're there for you.